Hello, on behalf of CERIC, the Canadian Education and Research Institute for Counseling, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Lindsay John, Events and Marketing Specialist at CERIC. It is our pleasure to bring you this free webinar with Dr. Norman Amundson and Tannis Goddard on Hope-Centered Career Interventions. We are delighted to work with Norm and Tannis, who will share an overview of their research findings and help us understand the competencies related to increasing hope in clients. We are thrilled to have more than 700 people register for today's webinar, so there is clearly a lot of interest in this topic. Before I turn you over to Norman Tannis, I would like to take a few moments to introduce you to CERIC. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, CERIC is a charitable organization that focuses on education and research in career development in Canada. One aspect of our work is that we fund research, such as the project you're going to hear about today. Then we also want to make sure the research gets into the hands of those who can benefit. So bringing you learning opportunity like today's webinar is a key part of our mandate. CERIC has three main programs. The Connexus National Career Development Conference, held in Ottawa each January. We also have our contactpoint.ca website, which is a free online community for career development professionals, and the Canadian Journal of Career Development, which is also free to access. You can learn more all about CERIC's work through our website at ceric.ca. Next, a couple of housekeeping notes. If during today's webinar you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box you see on your screen. Norm and Tannis will respond to as many as they can towards the end of the webinar. After today's webinar, we will send you a copy of the slides as well as a recording of this session and a brief online survey. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed presenters. Dr. Norman Amundson is a professor in counseling psychology at the University of British Columbia. Norm has received a number of professional awards and he is a sought after speaker, being an expert in the field. He has written many books, articles, and delivered numerous presentations, workshops at national and international conferences. Tannis Goddard designed and oversaw the delivery of federal and provincial career programs for over 25 years through training innovations. Now, as CEO of Mixed Mode, she shares her expertise with governments as they consider effective service delivery models and helps organizations develop high impact online and blended career services. I'll now turn you over to Norm and Tannis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There we go. Okay, well, let's get started. And I guess the first thing is to talk about an agenda and what we're going to do with that. And for that, we have a box. And whenever you open a box, you never know what you're going to find. Some of the topics we're going to talk about today are around partnership. We're also going to address a second one on the whole paradigm shift with regard to hope. And a third one is going to be on the power of intervention. We're also going to look at our research study, this research study that we did together, and look at some of the results we got from that, and then perhaps give a few tips in terms of how to get started. But as a starting point, let's get going.
Good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing the story of our partnership and how Norm and I came to be in this research project together. Both of us reside in BC, and we've known each other for over a decade. We share similar passions about creative work in the field, and we also share a love of the Gulf Islands here in BC, where Norm lives part-time and where my family loves to go visit him on our boat. As we came to know each other over the years, we discovered that we had very similar passions, but we came at those passions from a different perspective. Norm, being a counseling educator, has taught master's level students at UBC, and as Lindsay indicated, I have for 24 years designed and delivered employment programs for individuals seeking work funded by the federal and provincial governments. In our work, we both have discovered a passion for creative interventions and really looking at how we can package and deliver services for individuals that get them out of a cognitive trap and allow them to to use different faculties and approaches to the experience of going through unemployment and engaging in an active way. Many of you will be familiar with Norm's work of active engagement. He has a book of a similar title. We also are excited that he has a new edition launching this coming fall. And it's through that work that we started to explore the idea of what was really necessary for engaging people in a way that could help them increase their hopefulness when unemployed. So one day at Connexus 3.5 years ago, as often happens with Connexus, is we caught up with each other over a cup of coffee outside Daly's in the West End and talked about this work that Norm was doing with hope that he had developed with his colleagues. And we started to think about the fact that the clients that I was serving in an unemployment context regularly came in and presented with low hope. But what we realized in the field is that often when clients are presenting with low hope, the structures and the mechanisms for service don't necessarily allow time to tend to that. Often we jump in with questions and forms and databases and start to move clients forward in actions and activities that we think are going to help them with gaining their hope, but often we don't really tend to the emotion and the context and circumstances that people present with. Through our conversation, we also started to talk about our interests and passions about creative interventions. And some of you will know that a lot of my background in the last 15 years has been focused on the use of online spaces as a location for delivering employment services. And through this conversation, Norm and I started to hatch the plan that we wanted to create a research project that focused on building interventions to increase hopefulness and to consider the impact of what we could do if we designed these both face-to-face and online. We were fortunate enough to be able to approach RIS and CERIC and pitch the idea that we had, and we received incredible support for the concept and proceeded to create a proposal. And over the journey of the last 3.5 years, have worked very closely with CERIC, receiving financial, emotional, collegial support as we tackled a project that ended up becoming a lot bigger than we anticipated, because our goal was, and what we did do, was conduct all of the research live in the field into employment centers, which came with a lot of logistics, and CERIC was a great help in helping us move that forward.
Okay, so now my turn to run at this, and the first question, of course, is what is hope? And what do we mean by hope? And this is something that we've been thinking about for a while, and I'm not doing this alone, but I have a couple of other colleagues. I want to mention them as well. Spencer Niles from William and Mary University, and Jun Yoon, who now is just starting his position at Penn State University. And we started thinking about what is hope, and wanted something, and realized that it's something more than just it's something more than just an attitude, a feeling, an emotion. We really wanted to focus more on the action-oriented part of it. And for this, it was a real shift needed. We really needed to start thinking about not just hope, but as kind of that good feeling that you might have, but as something that involved action-oriented competencies. And our starting point for that was looking at some researchers, and we focused on 3 different researchers that we wanted to talk about. First of all, Snyder, who's worked for many years in the field of hope studies, and Albert Bandura, Tim Hall, and they all sort of, we started fusing the information, their theoretical perspectives, into a framework that we wanted to use, and really looking at 3 different elements that were important to consider. I mean, we looked at the idea of pathways, of agency, the idea of goals. These are all real key components of what we want to put into our hope model. And really, we want to sort of make sure that we're sort of looking at a more action-oriented approach to hope. And that's real key, is the action as well as that hopeful feeling. So it's kind of combined. It doesn't say that you're going to not have you know, that positive feeling, but it means you're going to do something with it. So the idea of a developmental approach, the fact that we can actually change things, that we can grow in hope, that we can do things that make a difference. So we have a model, and we want to show that, and some hope competencies that we're going to talk about. And basically, the approach we're going to use, we're going to have this, if we take a look at it in terms of a circle, so much of my work is around circles, I guess it's not surprising that it's another circle. But we embedded hope at the center and realized that hope is really the key piece that kind of holds everything together. It's not just a part of the equation, it's the centerpiece. And I think that's something that's really unique about the career development model that we're developing here, is putting that at the center. And then all around the outside, we have environmental factors that sort of move things around. And they move these things that are in the inside, the competencies, as we'll name them, the self-reflection. And self-reflection refers to, you know, these are the big questions, the purpose and meaning in life questions. Why am I doing this? What's this all about anyway? And, you know, what kind of legacy do I want to create for myself? Whatever. That's a part of hope. But also self-clarity. We have to understand ourselves, know who we are, what our interests are, and our skills, and our personality and values. You know, those are all important components of so we sort of separated self into two pieces there. We also look at visioning in terms of, it's not important just to know who you are. You also have to kind of extrapolate, push yourself out, look at where you want to go and what you want to become. And that's a part of it, as well as then setting some goals. I mean, goal setting and planning. What am I going to do? How am I going to do? Where am I going here? Sort of making some very clear plans about what's going to happen. And then, of course, the implementation, where you actually start to do things. And we all know in the chaotic world we live today that adaptation is needed. Plans don't just flow in one direction. There's always, okay, gotta go back, rejig it, plan B, plan C, whatever. So taking that kind of a perspective. So that's the basic elements of our model, but then we wanted to also put it into a form that gave it a little more life, of vibrancy. And for that, we used the pinwheel. And the pinwheel really, I think we like the pinwheel just because it's sort of, you know, if you ever see that, you put it out in the wind, it's always kind of in motion. And so much of what we're trying to talk about here is in motion. It's not a static kind of material. It's something that's always kind of moving around a little bit. And there's an uncertainty here and not quite sure what's going to happen. And for that, this pinwheel seemed to serve our purposes as a way of clarifying. So we use both of these approaches at different times. So the question, I guess, is, so how hopeful are you? You know, we could do a poll on this. How hopeful are you anyway when you think about where you are in your situation and what's happening in your life? You know, are you running on empty right now? You know, or maybe you're got a full tank, you know, like where are you at? And I suppose you could also say, with regard to which particular thing, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about your life in general, in terms of your career? The work we're doing really has application very broadly. Now, in terms of assessing that hope and where you're at, we developed, and we're just going to go over this really quickly, but you will have a time later to look at it. We developed a hope-centered career inventory, just as a kind of a quick snapshot of where are you at. And, you know, as you look at these different competencies, and we've included hope in there as well. Where are you at? And we used a web here to sort of help people define where they're going to be. And, you know, as with any kind of inventory, there's a series of questions that people respond to, and they get a way of scoring these to give you kind of a visual picture of what that might look like. So, you do, where, to what extent do you, are you high on adapting or high on self-clarity or whatever? And this is just an example of somebody who's, you can look at this, at what the score was, and you see that for this person, they were really high on adapting, envisioning, and self-reflection, but not so high when it came to implementing and goal setting, self-clarity, and even their basic level of hope. So we then take this, and it helps us define sort of a more, a specific implementation plan in terms of what kind of interventions might we make with this person? How might this influence our the kind of intervention plan that we might design for this person as contrasted to somebody with a different profile? So we'll give you a chance to work on this for yourself. We'll say more about that at the end, but for now, let's move on to the next segment.
Great. So as I was introducing, this particular research project wanted to look at how we could design and create interventions that would build from the model Norm has described and target the ability to actually increase individuals' hope competencies, either increasing ones that they may have scored low on the HCCI, or in fact helping them work with ones that they were strong in as a means to help motivate their movement through a career and employment counseling process. So when we talk about an intervention, really we're talking about an intentional treatment, an intentional activity that we design and that we deliver in a purpose-formed way that is targeting a particular area of growth. And when we started to think about this and form the research project, we found a number of things created questions for us. We knew we wanted to work with the unemployed job seeker, the individual coming into a center that's unemployed, looking for support, and we had to make some assumptions about who that person might be, what their needs might be. And then we were also starting to think a lot about the practitioners, because it's not just about the client, it's also about, as practitioners, with our skill and confidence in using particular interventions, how do we break out of some of the molds that we have fallen into in any particular work context we might have, what's needed to help practitioners approach their practice from a different and more creative standpoint. And as we said earlier, because we are also interested in the experience of delivering these interventions, both face-to-face and online, we had a number of questions about what that was going to mean for both the practitioners and the unemployed job seeker. So we knew we were interested in hope, and we knew we were interested in interventions and clients and practitioners, and from that we were able to form some research objectives that this project addressed. Our first one was that we wanted to develop online and face-to-face hope interventions. So we wanted to very concretely evaluate the different competencies in the hope model and tailor the development of interventions to address those. Once they were developed and we were administering them to clients, we wanted to measure their effectiveness, particularly with the unemployed population. Then we wanted to understand the impact of face-to-face and online delivery outcomes. And this was a big question mark. In fact, this is an area where I'm actually studying in my PhD that I hope to finish next year. And because Norm and I have been dear colleagues for a long time, he said, okay, Tannis, we'll give you a try. We'll try these online, but I don't think he was totally convinced at the beginning that it was something that we should, that would come close to face-to-face impact. But we definitely approached it from an inquisitive standpoint, not assuming what the outcome should be, but really just curious, what was it like if we used these two delivery mediums together? And then the fourth area that we really wanted to focus on was understanding the experience of practitioners, both for the different modalities of delivery, but also for what the experience of working with the notion of hope and tailored interventions meant. And I think when we wrote these research objectives 3+ years ago, we really had no idea the impact that working with the concept of hope was going to have on practitioners. And we'll speak about that in just a little bit. So briefly, what was the approach to our research design? Well, we started with obviously participant recruitment. We recruited clients from 2 employment centers in British Columbia, one in a rural community and one in the center area of the Vancouver region. This was a little more challenging than we might anticipate because these were live clients going through a process and they needed to consider whether they wanted to engage in some upfront work on hope before they continued forward with their work. It was very short intervention, very light touch, but it was still, there was a lot of logistics we had to manage within the center context. Once clients had volunteered and wanted to register into the program, we administered a number of assessments at the front end to help us with the measurement of the research. That included the HCCI that Norm spoke about. We also included vocational identity scales, general self-efficacy scales, and the career engagement scale. These were designed to help us see, after the client had completed the HOPE intervention, they retook those assessments so we could determine what level of impact the actual intervention had. Approximately half of our clients went into face-to-face and half of the clients went into online interventions. What I'll mention here is that this was not a random selection approach. In my experience working in the field with both face-to-face and programs, it is really important that clients self-select into a modality that works for them. And so clients were presented with both options and had the opportunity to choose whether they wanted to participate in the HOPE interventions face-to-face or online. Again, as I mentioned, once they completed their program, their assessments, they recompleted the assessment so we could have a baseline measure. 20 of our participants engaged in extensive interviews, each interview lasting well over an hour, where we were able to glean a lot of information about the experience that they had, what helped and what hindered. In addition, we had our facilitators engage in focus groups along with our research assistants so that we could understand their experience throughout the process. And we also had our practitioners completing reflective practice journals throughout the delivery of the interventions so that we could better understand the experience that they were having. Something that's not on this chart that I'll briefly mention is we also utilized Norm's ways of mattering scale, and at the end of the intervention, we had both the clients and the practitioners complete that scale so that we could get a better understanding of what the emotional and mattering context was in the delivery of interventions. So another look at what we did, I've described the top row to you really already in terms of the clients coming in and participating in the face-to-face and online interventions. Once they had registered, they had a debrief with their counselor about their HCCI results and then participated in, for the majority of individuals, 5 interventions. And you can see these interventions named here, and below the names of career flow, circle of strengths, etc., you can see the particular competencies that the interventions were targeting. In the case of face-to-face delivery, these interventions were delivered the first 3 together and then the last 2 together, and they would have been delivered over 2 sessions, the first session lasting approximately 2 hours and the second session lasting approximately an hour and a half. So we're actually talking about relatively low touch, fairly quick experiences, but the interventions were very strongly designed and targeted to be able to hone in on the particular competencies. In the case of the online delivery, they were delivered generally over approximately a 2-week period where clients had the opportunity to come in and come out of the online space and participate in their interventions. So what's behind a HOPE intervention? For us, the HOPE interventions were really designed to target a specific competency in a focused and time-efficient manner. One of the goals we had was that it would create a memorable session, something that clients would be able to walk away from and come back and look at through interviews and reflections and say, yes, I remember this activity, I know what we did, and I know why we did it. So that sense of purpose, so that clients are engaging in something, they know why, they know how, and they know the impact. We are working from an assumption that often in employment services, clients don't clearly understand why they're engaging in something, and their ability to be able to talk to us about that was really important. We designed the interventions based on analogical reasoning with the use of metaphors to encourage people to step outside of the current experience and look at it from another perspective. We used creative learning and counseling approaches that went beyond talk, using such things as physical movement, practical reflection, drawing, and writing. We embraced a constructivist point of view, and it was critically important to us that we designed these interventions and coached and trained our practitioners to deliver them in such a manner that the environment created a high degree of mattering. The research that we were drawing on indicates that the higher the degree of mattering in a experience between a practitioner and client, the greater likelihood of learning and a change in perspective. So mattering in this context would be things such as noticing, valuing, and treating each other with respect, being as well as doing in a session, finding common ground, personal as well as professional, and creating a strong working alliance that includes respect, trust, consistency, and helpfulness. When we were creating the interventions, the first step that we had was to create select the 5 interventions and create guides that would ultimately coach practitioners through the delivery of these interventions. At the end of the session, we'll show you where you can get access to these guides as well. We drafted the interventions, we pilot tested with practitioners, and then once we had the face-to-face interventions developed, we then went on to create online interventions that essentially were the same topic, whether that was career flow or anything else, but ultimately that we had to rethink how we were going to deliver the service. What we were going to do face-to-face in a counselor's office with pinwheels and lots of color and excitement needed to look very different online. And that started a long process for Norm and my team and myself to really look at how we can use a variety of information communication technologies such as videos, presented information, activities, phones, web meetings, how to integrate a variety of tools to emulate an intervention that we were familiar with in a face-to-face context. So what we'd like to do now is briefly introduce you to a couple of the interventions that we delivered. We had 5, as I mentioned, and Norm will introduce you to Walking the Problem and a couple of others, just to give you a flavor of what these interventions looked like. Once Norm sets the stage for you about how we used Walking the Problem in a face-to-face context, I'll jump back in and give you a little bit of background about the process we had to go through from taking such a physical activity into another context in an online space. So I'll turn it back to you, Norm.
This was actually kind of an interesting one for me because it's a very, the idea of walking the problem is very simply taking something like the anybody familiar with solution-based counseling, you've heard of the miracle question, the idea of taking people from where they are today and getting them to sort of look forward, from the bottom of the hill, walk up to the top, and then from the top of the hill, look back down to where you came from. So changing perspective, and usually that's done cognitively, where you're just kind of sitting around talking like that. But in this case, we actually walk it. So we have people crossing the room, walking from one side of the room to the other, and thinking about where they are and what they've done, and so on. And it's for some people, has no effect. For others, it's an incredible experience just to change that slight perspective. Before I go much further, though, there was one of the questions. A question came up on the thing in the chat line here, talking about is it the order of these interventions? Do they have to be done exactly the way we lay them out? And I think it's much more it's much more flexible than that. We sort of picked what I think are some of the best interventions, and this is really a powerful intervention, Walking the Problem, but as to when exactly it needs to be put into the process, I think it's great at the beginning, but I've also had success in the middle and also at the end. So, it's not that exact a science, I would say, in terms of ordering interventions. But so that's the intervention, and Walking the Problem. It's taking the miracle question, but making it physical. And that's something I really want to do in terms of interventions, is really to create that physical aspect, feeling it in our body, not just something we do cognitively. But of course, having done that, how then do you put that online And so, as Tannis has said, we had lots of fun trying. I said, well, okay, give that a go and see what you come up with. So, Tannis, I'll turn it over to you, and you can tell me what happened after that.
Great, thank you. So for many years, I had seen Norm conduct walking the problem exercise. In fact, had participated as a friend and colleague numerous times, and oftentimes actually used the exercise to think through a problem that I had. So I had very visceral experience with the intervention. Sorry, I'm hearing some feedback on my phone. Okay, I think we're clear. And so we talked about a number of different ways. We initially thought about doing this online from a reflective standpoint. At one point, we thought we'd have iPads and actually get people up from their chair and try to walk the problem. And then we had to go back to the core principle of we needed to evoke a similar experience to what happened in the face-to-face context, but not necessarily try to replicate it in its exactness, because that's then not using the affordances of what the ICT platforms offer us. And the way that we ended up approaching this was through a video visualization. And in fact, from our participants, from the interviews that we did with them, this turned out to be a very, very powerful activity for them. Many of them saying that they would go back and redo it again. So we'd like you to experience this. It's a short 2-minute video. We're hoping that the sound goes well. We've practiced numerous times, but it is technology, so we're going to hope for the best. And I'm going to start that video now. And as I say, it'll run for about 2 minutes, and then we'll be back to debrief it with you.
Imagine standing at the bottom of a mountain. Visualize the problem you have described from where you are today, at this time in your life. What do you feel? How does the problem seem to you? Is it manageable? Is it overwhelming? You are now going to look ahead, look towards the future. We often try to find solutions by looking at them from the problem place. In other words, we stand at the bottom of the mountain and look up to the solution place at the top of the mountain. Today you are going to stand at the top of the mountain in that solution place and look back at where you have come from. Imagine taking a walk from the bottom of the mountain, from your problem to the top of the mountain to your solution. Don't worry about what you actually need to do to solve your problem. Imagine that you are standing at the top of the mountain and your problem has been solved. Can you visualize that future? Take time to imagine the details, where you are, what you are doing, the people around you. How does it feel? Was the journey worth it? From the solution place, look back to where you came from and act as a guide to your current self. What would you say to the person who is standing in the problem place that you just came from? Do you have any advice to give? How would you respond to any hesitations or fears that you are experiencing? What steps would you tell the person to take in order to get to the solution place? What would be the very first step in moving toward your goal? Take a few minutes now to write down your thoughts and reflections.
So I hope that the video came through for all of you and you were able to get a little bit of a feel for what the experience was like. We'll certainly welcome any feedback or comments that you have, but we did find that it was a highly effective exercise to achieve the goals of helping individuals step back from their current context and look forward to a solution to the problem. So Norm, if you have nothing else to add on walking the problem, I'll move you to Circle of Strength.
Yeah, the Circle of Strength was a really interesting, I find it's a really powerful activity. It's where you get people to tell a story, and that story is your center point. But then you help collaboratively sort of work with the other person to sort of look at some of all the different elements of the story. I mean, what does it say about you? And most people can come up with 2 or 3 things that you know, they hear the story and say, oh yeah, it says I'm a creative person, hardworking, whatever. But in working together, you'll find that you can add in lots of other elements to that. And I am increasingly becoming, you know, very. I just think the idea of witnessing is so important, and as in that counseling or coaching role, we are in a position where we can witness strengths to people, and people talked about how good this made them feel, how it just elevated them and pushed them up, and so I can't say enough about that. And again, I don't want to go on too much because we've got a really limited time today, so I'll leave that one. Talk about the 2 or 3 chair activity. Again, taking something this time from sort of a Gestalt spin-off, you might say, where you get people, instead of just thinking about problems in their mind or you know, different options that they're thinking about, have them sit in a chair and say, okay, now you're thinking about being a teacher, sit there. Now you want to retire, sit there. And then I bring in a 3rd chair, which I call the moderator chair, which is kind of step outside of your problem and now look at it from this other, the moderator or the counselor, or whatever chair, and look at what's there. And again, another very interesting way, a physical way to involve clients and to become more active in getting them thinking about the problems and how they might organize them in slightly different ways.
So something that we explored and certainly came to think about through this project is the fact that our clients are coming into centers, accessing employment services through many different contexts, and that really in today's world we have so many communication methods and mediums available to us that the challenge we put to ourselves and out to the field is to not only think about creative interventions from a face-to-face context, but to think about how we can use other media as a way to reach our clients. I know our Hope team is really excited about the idea of creating an app that people could use that helps them, you know, interpret their level of hopefulness and grow those competencies as they need them. So this is really just a call out to all of us to not exclude face-to-face by any means, but see what other tools we can use to expand the Hope context for individuals. So when we think about Hope interventions, and again, you know, this is a very quick introduction to them, and we're going to provide you access to more information. We started to talk about where we think Hope interventions might fit in the field and the things we can do with them. They could be used, as we much did in this research project, as a quick start, as something to get somebody going before we start jumping into the nitty-gritty of the employment concern. It can help us focus on action-oriented work. If we're working with a client through a career planning process and we experience them feeling stuck, taking a creative intervention, you know, understanding maybe where they're stuck in that Hope model. Are they stuck on self-reflection? Are they stuck on goal setting? And can we use, you know, a very short half-an-hour targeted intervention to help release some of that stickiness? As a readiness activity, many clients come into the centers carrying quite a lot of weight, a lot of baggage about what the unemployment journey has been like, and we need to help them get ready to move themselves into a different state. So we think there's a lot of applicability there. And they can be part of long-term or short-term sessions. So, you know, we designed the research project in one particular way so that we could have it consistent and predictable for the research purpose, but it's important to see that the notion of using the Hope model and Hope interventions can be used in a variety of delivery contexts. So we conducted the research. Sorry, go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, no, just thinking about, I just want to say a comment here in terms of the research we're doing. While we're talking today about the unemployment study, there's a number of other studies that are happening sort of parallel to all of this. It's all happening at the same time, which is a good and a bad scenario in some ways. But anyway, we have studies with internationally trained health professionals, Syrian refugees with Mosaic in Vancouver, with UBC alumni, with the graduate students. And the interesting thing in what we're going to be talking about is we're getting this, the kind of results we're seeing are very parallel in all of these studies. So we're quite encouraged, not by the fact that we've had success in one specific study, but the fact that it really is running across all these different projects.
Great, thanks, Norm. So within this particular study and the other studies that Norm's talked about, what we've heard as a common theme is the value of co-construction, the value of having the practitioner and the client engage in creative and different ways to help the client better or differently understand their context. I think that might be one of the #1 takeaways that we have from delivering these interventions. When we interviewed our participants, this is the kinds of language they used when they talked about their facilitator: respectful, open, honest, encouraging, flexible. And what was really interesting in this is that when you read the interview transcripts, the language is consistent whether or not the experience that the client had was face-to-face or whether it was online through writing and telephone communication with their practitioner. So the effect of the HOPE intervention created a sense of mattering and connection with the facilitator. The kinds of things that they said within both activities, again, face-to-face or online, that were helpful was using visuals and metaphors to understand circumstances. There was a high degree of resonance with the use of water imagery. It seemed to be, whether we're talking about still waters, white waters, rapids, it was an imagery that many, many people resonated with. They saw the value of having somebody else hold that mirror up and help them see new perspectives through discussion. So it wasn't, it wasn't just a Rogerian technique of hearing people, but actually engaging with them to help them discover and find their own new perspectives. And working through the activities to identify options and solutions, I think what we picked up is that often in employment services and programs, we're working on a journey with clients, but they can't often see exactly what they're working towards. And so the concreteness of each intervention, having the client leave with a concrete understanding or solution was something that seemed to have both impact on their experience of the intervention, but they indicated was going to enable them to act more quickly. Through the research, we found some unique things that people said about the online experience. In general, the feedback was highly consistent between the mediums, but the few things we learned that were valuable to participants in the online experience was that they had time and space to reflect, that they had opportunity to write down and articulate their thoughts, that they actually had a tangible, written, printable record at the end of the event, and that it gave them flexibility to access and complete the interventions during time frames that worked with their life, such as they may be parenting kids during the day and had time in the evening to work on these activities. You'll be able to see in the slideshow or the slide deck that you get from CERIC some of the quotes that we heard from our participants, talking about things being very supportive and that it was important to be able to have a better sense of self to be able to act. We'd also like to tell you just a little bit about the practitioner experience, because as we said, we came into this research interested, primarily on the client, but also very curious about what we could learn about practitioners, how we could train them in new and creative methods, and what that impact might have on their perceptions. What I can tell you is that from being in my offices during the time of the research project, the fact that we were talking about hope and we weren't talking always about action plans and timeliness of service and some of the other really important characteristics of our field, but that the practitioners got to talk about hope and how they were actually helping their clients be more hopeful, had a really positive effect in the entire office environment, and certainly for the practitioners engaged in that service. It gave them a new lens and a new way to think about their practice. I'll remind you that we gathered information on our practitioners, including we had reflective case conferencing with them. They completed practice journals. They completed the Ways of Mattering questionnaire for their clients, and they also conducted interview and focus group. And Norm's just going to tell us a little bit more about the things that we learned from our practitioners in this study.
It'd be really quick here because our time is running out, but basically relationships with clients. They talked about how you know, the strength of the relationship, and they loved the ways they were being challenged to deliver things in a more flexible, creative. It was just unique, you know, something different than what they were used to, and that really worked for them. Now, there's one other thing here, and how they felt about it. They were excited and empowered and energized, and I mean, it was really fun to sort of listen to all these comments about how it changed for them and just energized them as well as their clients. So I mean, really, what you have here is a two-way street, right? And we have a few, again, as Tannis said, few comments from practitioners that you know, the kind of things that they felt, you know, how it empowered them to sort of work with clients in new and different ways, really. And the
perhaps
fact
one of the most, go ahead, Norm.
Such a short period of time too, eh? The fact that it was all being done in 4 hours. I mean, wow. They were sort of amazed with what they were achieving in such a short period.
And they felt really proud of their work, which was a real privilege to get to witness. So what are the top research outcomes that we've been able to glean from this project? I'm going to run through them very quickly so that Norm has a few minutes to wrap up with us on next steps and how we can take this further. The first outcome, targeted hope interventions increased hope competencies, was very consistent finding. When we remeasured the HCCI, we found that the particular interventions we delivered did in fact increase those hope competencies that we were looking at. We found that the hope competencies helped clients develop new perspectives, confidence, and ability to take action. We could correlate that the increase in the hope competency directly related to the activities and the actions that the clients told us they were about to take. We found that the way that we designed the interventions, the facilitation strategies, resulted in impactful experiences for both the clients and practitioners, leading us to believe that this very creative and physical approach to learning was helpful in the career development context. We discovered that a range of communication and delivery strategies proved to be effective. That we saw no significant difference between the outcomes for the face-to-face or the online clients within the research study. And finally, the maybe really significant learning is that we learned that when designing interventions in this creative way, whether face-to-face or online, we could evoke emotions of mattering that were parallel for both clients and practitioners in each medium. So Norm, I'll turn it over to you. Okay,
getting started. And I love this little slide here. You got your fish, and you can see there he's wearing a little shark fin. So, and that really tags into the whole notion that I see in running this project and the other projects that I've mentioned, the idea of courage and creativity. You know, the idea to do something different, to be courageous and take an act. Because it isn't easy. I mean, you know, people are when everybody's going in one direction and you want to do something a little bit different. We're not talking about changing everything, but just a little bit different. It's always requires some degree of courage. And there's a sense of creativity here of opening yourself up, being more, you know, flexible and free in terms of what you're doing, because it's so easy to get trapped into all the, you know, the bureaucracy and the filling out forms and all this kind of thing. But really, I think that's a key part in it. And so I won't say more about that, but those are really key concepts, I think, in terms of yourself and how it all starts in a very small way. You know, that little bud, that little fern sort of all coiled up in there, ready to burst out. And the bursting out happens in your garden. It happens in life and in your career. It's something that you know, is bigger than just you know, once you start to do these kind of things, it does act as a bit of a spice. You know, it just kind of makes everything change in a slightly different way. And again, in using the image of the chain, we're not talking about doing something completely different than what you've ever done. We're just saying, let's add in just a small component here to what's already happening. So it isn't like you got to go back to, retrain in a whole different way. No, take what everybody's doing and let's add just this small component to it. Okay, Tannis, do you want to?
Yeah. So we had introduced earlier in the session some concrete ways that you might consider how to use HOPE interventions. And what we encourage you to do is to try it your way. See, take a look at the interventions we've developed, take a look at the competency framework, and think about what you could do that could just have a small impact in the practice as you deliver it. And certainly, Norm and I would love to hear from you. We're going to be continuing this work with our colleagues, and we're looking at building training programs for practitioners and expanding our reach to help the field integrate HOPE in a more concrete and conscious way. And we'd love to hear from you on the ways that you can do this. In terms of follow-up to this session, what you will find is if you go to, you'll see it in your slides, www.hopecareerinterventions.com. You'll be able to access all of the 5 interventions that come with a guide, overview to the intervention, as well as details about how to facilitate and deliver that intervention. Gives you a sense of some of the guides that we've put together. And finally, we also want to invite you to try out the HCCI for yourself, the Hope Center Career Inventory. We find, those of us even involved in this model, that we use the notions of the HCCI in our daily work. If I'm struggling with something, I pause and I think, oh, is this about, I don't have clear enough vision, or I'm not sure what my implementation strategy is. So I encourage you to try the HCCI, think about a context in your life, whether that's work, home, family, and complete that HCCI from that perspective. It'll give you a report, and you'll be able to see where you're mapping to the competencies of HOPE. So again, you can see the website to access it there is the same hopecareerinterventions.com/try the HCCI, and you'll be able to get immediate access into the HCCI and complete that report. And as you'll note on the screen, that the access expires on June 27th. It's been an absolute privilege to work with CERIC, to work with Norm in the delivery of this research project. It's certainly been a life-changing event for me to be involved in this. And after working in the field for 25 years, I feel like if we can all look at how we can bring hope to our clients in a more constructive way, we're going to make a big difference in the movement and the experience of our clients' lives. So I'll close off for here and turn it off to Norm to say a last few words.
Yeah. I guess one of the things as we close is really we're interested in hearing from you as well. When I teach this and when we work with this kind of method, it isn't just here's a pill and take it and things are going to be better. What we really want is this is something for you to sort of adapt and play with. And I've had the privilege in each of these projects that are working. Everybody's kind of doing it slightly differently or changing it to your situation. And really, I'm fine with that. In our teaching, we encourage creativity. I mean, it'd be kind of silly to be telling people to be creative and do it exactly as we tell you what to do. So these are all guidelines. These are ideas about what might work, what might change your situation a little bit, but we want to hear what you have to say as well. So we would encourage a dialogue. We'd like you to contact us either individually or, I think our big thank you slide at the end gives our email address, and you can, send us an email, or if there's other questions you want to submit. I think we've got to most of the ones that were offered up, but let's keep talking about this. Let's see what we can do, and let's try it out in different places. I mean, right now, in terms of, we have all those projects I've talked about, but we're also hoping to work with addictions, hoping to work with people dealing with autism. There's lots of different ways in which I think hope could be integrated into existing services. So we're hoping that we can take this and move it further. And it's just been a great privilege to work with Tannis and to work with my other two colleagues who aren't here today, but are certainly here in spirit, Spencer and June, because we have formed a team that we're working together with, and Mariana and Jane are in the background there creating these wonderful slides that you've seen today. And so thank you to them as well for all the work they did. What a fabulous, and the CERIC team in terms of helping to make this possible and setting it up for us. So we realize that this is a bit of a tip of the iceberg type of presentation. I mean, we have so much more that we could say. You wouldn't believe how much it's been sort of taken out or is underneath that water. But hopefully at some point we'll get a chance to address you more personally and in a situation where we can get into some of those other components. But thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Norman Tannis. We appreciate you sharing the in-depth background to the research and the valuable insights on the Hope-Centered Career Development Model itself. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will email you a link to the recording later today along with a copy of the slides. And we will also be sending you a brief evaluation form and would request you to please provide your feedback on this webinar. Lastly, if you're interested in a deep dive, the final report of Hope-Centered Career Interventions Research Project is available for free download on CERIC's website at ceric.ca/hope. And if you're interested in more research like this, then do consider joining us at the Connexus National Career Development Conference in Ottawa in January. Norman Tannis are frequent Connexus presenters, and you may be considering submitting a proposal as well. So just a reminder that the proposal deadline is this Friday, June 9th. Thank you so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.